Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jennifer Walsh, Dean of the College of Environmental Design. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning for what is certain to be an exciting program, featuring first a lecture by Manuel Castells, University Professor and Wallis Annenberg Chair of Communication Technology and Society at USC, and of course, our very own Professor Emeritus of City and Regional Planning. Second, we'll have a debate amongst assistant professors, recent alumni, and graduate students about the future of our college. And to close out, we will have what I know will be an illuminating set of reflections by our rapporteur, not only of today, but of the last 3 days of our 50th anniversary celebration, by Dana Cuff, Professor of Architecture and Urban Design and Director of City Lab at UCLA, and also one of our own alumna. This morning's lecture, as well as the lectures of the last 3 evenings by Paul Collier of Oxford University, Janine Benyus of the Biomimicry Institute, and Barbara Maria Stafford of the University of Chicago and now Georgia Tech, have been organized as part of the College of Environmental Design's 50th anniversary celebration. Many of you were in the room this last fall when we held a series of celebratory events to pay tribute to CED's legacy and history. And at that time, our program featured reflections from distinguished alumni and emeriti faculty and major lectures from Del Upton and Sir Peter Hall. We had and have a lot of cause for revelry in light of the compelling history of the college. In 1959, the college was established as the first school to combine the disciplines that we now know as that constitute the college into a single college. And the college led the way toward an integrated approach to analyzing, understanding, and designing the built environment. And the college was also among the first to think about environmental design as a profoundly social and cultural act, as a practice that was inseparable from the context, social, economic, cultural, and environmental. And it was also founded on the belief that not only should the disciplines of our college work together, but also that we should have, as part of our mix, people with very diverse backgrounds, including scientists and social scientists and engineers. And so if you look at the roster over the years, you will see mathematicians, physicists, mechanical engineers, sociologists, psychologists, even geographers. At the same time, CED has historically emphasized environmental design as a profoundly ethical practice, one that cannot be done in isolation, but indeed must be co-produced with communities, other stakeholders, and policymakers. And linking theory to practice, I think this college has a long and well-deserved reputation for what we call design activism and experimentation. For example, building housing for homeless or disabled people, creating new models of settlement for the global south, uncovering patterns of environmental injustice, collaborating with communities to design parks and open space, or experimenting with new materials, digital design strategies, or geographical information systems. This spring semester, we turn away from the past and look toward the future. And the big question is, what's next? How should the next 50 years unfold? What is our collective vision, however provisional, for the future? The college was prescient and ahead of its time in 1959, and my goal is to ensure that we stay that way, that we're forward-looking and inventive, even if the future that we have before us is radically different than what people were thinking about in 1959. This is a world that we face in which the parameters are rapidly changing in response to global dynamics, new technology, dynamic struggles for social, economic, and environmental justice, and the challenges of learning to make buildings that are at once elegant but yet high performance, and to the necessity to design collaborative strategies to retrofit large swaths of the built environment. We need to be on the forefront of digital design and be leading the geodesign revolution. And we also need to work in solidarity with grassroots groups in the making of well-loved places, and above all, we need to envision the human settlements of the future, replete with social meaning, ecological value, and possibilities for health and livelihood. These are incredible challenges. They're major challenges and some of the central challenges of our day. They raise critical questions, such as what should we be teaching the students who come here to the college, to Berkeley, to become planners, architects, landscape architects, urban designers. These are the people who will be planning and designing and building human settlements all the way from individual homes and gardens to the urban public realm to global city regions. What skills do they need as this century unfolds? How will the complex, dynamic, and emerging contexts that are confronting environmental designers shape the demands on us for the education, research, and practice of the future? This semester, as part of our 50th anniversary celebration, which we launched last week, we'll begin to grapple with these challenging questions. And this is a process that will be formative and ongoing. Today, we want to continue to jumpstart our thinking, first by listening to Professor Castells, always a thrilling experience. And I think what he will do today is focus our attention on the various grassroots movements that are self-organizing around the world in response to the economic crisis. We will also listen carefully to those voices of the younger generations as they debate the future of the college and our community, and also tell us about the problematics that ought to be driving our theoretical explorations and the models of practice that might be capable of tackling the challenges ahead. And as I mentioned earlier, we will hear last from our rapporteur, Dana Cuff, who will make sense of it all from her perspective as an alumna and an environmental designer and a scholar. It is my great pleasure to introduce Manuel. Manuel Castells is University Professor and Wallis Annenberg Chair in Communications, Technology, and Society at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. He is, as well, Research Professor at the Open University of Catalonia in Barcelona. And as I mentioned, and you probably all know, he was for many years a professor here in the Department of City and Regional Planning from 1979 to 2003 before he went to USC. He's also held positions at the University of Paris, the University Autónoma de Madrid, and MIT, as well as visiting positions in 12 countries. And he's lectured in over 300 academic institutions in 46 countries. So he has a big carbon footprint, actually. To say that Manuel is prolific and prodigious does not actually quite capture the situation. He's the author of 22 academic books and editor or co-editor of an additional 21 books, as well as over 100 articles in academic journals. He is widely read. His 1996 to 1998 trilogy, The Information Age, Economy, Society, and Culture, has been reprinted in English 18 times and translated into 21 languages. Between 2001 and 2009, he published one book a year while splitting his time between LA and Barcelona. His latest work is Communication Power, which came out just last year. Not surprisingly, in recognition of his groundbreaking work, he has received the highest awards and honors, including the Guggenheim Fellowship, major awards from the American Sociological Association and the American Political Science Association, and Spain's National Prize of Sociology and Political Science. He's also received 17 honorary doctorates, and he's been knighted for cause of scientific merit by the governments of France, Finland, Chile, Portugal, and Catalonia. Now, Professor Castells is the world's foremost theorist of the power of communication. In his trilogy, Manuel argued that the late 20th century's dramatic structural changes in the relations of production, power, and experience heralded a new society, or information age, with profound implications for individual identity and social relations. One result of these dynamics is the emergence of global centers of capital, power, control, and informational networks, and also the emergence of black holes or informational ghettos of the global south, places of exclusion, cut off from information, innovation, and power over the future. Reviews of this trilogy characterized it as unrivaled in ambition and figure that the work, quote, sets a new standard against which all future meta-accounts of the information age will be measured. Not only did the trilogy trigger a rich and lasting debate, but it also created an entire new industry, jobs, in the Manuel Castells studies sector. I have to hasten to add that Manuel has not always worked on theories of the network society and communications power. His initial theoretical entanglements were with the city, from the urban question to the city and the grassroots and the informational city. And it's impossible to convey the significance of this work and the intensity of debate and excitement that surrounded the emergence of Manuel's new radical way of thinking about urbanism and urban society, and also his recasting of urban theory through the lens of the information revolution. I set eyes on Manuel in this building in, I think it was, what did we say, 1978? 1978. I was a postdoc hanging around Worcester Hall. And of course, I had read The Urban Question and had instantly become a strict Althusserian. Manuel was here to give a lecture prior to his decision to come to Berkeley. It was a warm, dark night. The lecture hall was packed, and people still smoked. And so the room was incredibly murky and smoky, and everybody was, caffeined out to the gills. Manuel began to speak, and he continued to speak very, very fast, very, very Spanish, for more than 2 hours straight. Once in a while, a faculty member would get up and kind of desolatorily say, "Is it time?" No. And he spoke about his urban research. He talked about the urban question, theories of collective consumption, and the wild city. We were all mesmerized. And I think we knew that we were present at a historic moment of paramount significance for our discipline and to this place. Luckily for us, he fell in love with Berkeley, and the rest is history. I'm very honored to introduce my dear friend, Manuel.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning. I'm really deeply honored to have been asked by my friend of 30 years, Dean Walsh, to speak on the occasion of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of a college in which I have taught for 24 years of the 50-year history. This college has always been at the forefront of thinking and acting on key issues of the built environment and its relationship to the environment at large. And so my lecture will try to focus on the key issues of the moment we are living at this point. We are in the midst of a major structural crisis worldwide. It is a multidimensional crisis, which I contend at its core an urban crisis. It's a global environmental crisis, but that is by and large the consequence of an unsustainable model of metropolitan living. It is a financial crisis that starts from a housing crisis. And it is a social crisis characterized by the unbonding of community and the rise of radical individualism and free riderism, favored by the decline of public space. And it is a crisis of governance, including local governance, prompted by the widespread distrust in our political institutions worldwide. And so unless we reverse course and gradually introduce different forms of life, that is, of urban life, the life that is the life of the majority of dwellers in this planet, the crisis will deepen, with each dimension feeding into each other. So rather than accepting the current trend and embarking on a sadistic trip of doomsday scenario, I will go briefly over the features of the crisis, and then I will elaborate on possible avenues of a new model of urbanism that could pave the way towards a new way of life. And those who know me know that I don't do this usually. I stick very close to my research findings, to what the evidence we have. I think at this moment in history, we may stick to our research while we all go down fast. So who cares? I don't care too much about losing my reputation as a researcher if 1/10 of these ideas can help a little bit. And you will see they're very unusual ideas. But let's start with the solid part of my lecture, meaning by the way, I'm not going to talk 2 hours. But don't be too happy. I'm going to talk 1 hour, which is what I was told to do. And then we will have, I hope, some time for questions and answers. So this crisis, in fact, signals the end of some world. It's not the end of the world, but it is the end of one particular world, the world built in the last 2 decades on what I call a cart house of speculative global finance. The urban dimension of the crisis is not peripheral, it's central to this model of social and economic organization that led to the current massive default in finance, in consumption, in production, and in employment. The trigger of the crisis was the crumbling of the housing mortgage market as a result of the high-risk lending practices, the so-called subprime loans. Moreover, these unsecured mortgages were used as collaterals for other financial products and were integrated in derivatives, in synthetic securities developed by financial institutions in a context of loose regulation and lack of transparency. And so when the real estate bubble burst and mortgage market started to default, the crisis in housing finance spread to the entire financial system because of the overexposure of lending institutions and their insurers. In the year 2007, worldwide, the value of financial companies' assets over the value of the securities they sold was just 1.5%. In the US, the debt of financial companies increased from 39% of GDP in 1988 to 111% of GDP 20 years later in 2008. And this fact that the largest financial institutions were in a state of financial bankruptcy, technically, prompted massive government intervention, but which bailed out the financial institutions, but at the same time, most lending stopped for the majority of would-be borrowers. And this is the root of the crisis, because consumer demand has been largely fueled by easy credit without any kind of guarantee. And consumer demand accounted in the last 10, 15 years for 2/3 of GDP growth in Europe and 3/4 of GDP growth in the United States. So if we stop easy lending, we stop consumer demand, and we stop the economy, therefore we stop employment, and you know the rest. Current attempts to fix the financial system depend on a fundamental thing, restoring trust, because trust is the foundation of financial markets, both for lenders and for borrowers. But restoring trust requires establishing a new regulatory framework that provides transparency and eliminates high-risk financial practices such as CDSs, CDOs, and other exotic derivatives. It requires bringing under control the hedge funds and the other financial companies that populate the world, what I call the World Wide Web of speculative investment. This is tantamount to say that the era of easy credit has ended. Not all credit, but of credit provided on the basis of the artificial value of obscure securities based on shaky assumptions and unreliable warranties. And securities that used mortgages as collaterals in an inflated real estate market based on the assumption that prices would always go up. These practices and these financial institutions, non-banks, account for the largest share of capital made available for lending in recent years. In the United States, between 1993 and 2008, banks only accounted for 20% of total lending. 80% of lending was the fact of all these financial institutions based on derivative schemes and creation of virtual capital. When the company liabilities were exposed, financial collapse spread from the mortgage market to the entire financial industry and from the United States to the rest of the world. In 2008, the world's total market capitalization fell by more than half. From early 2008 to spring 2009, the crisis wiped out $30 trillion of the value of global shares and $11 trillion from the value of homes, which together amount to about 75% of world GDP was wiped out. Under such conditions, financial institutions, with some notorious exceptions, like Lehman Brothers, were bailed out by governments. And after this, banks and financial institutions focus on what? On cleansing their toxic assets, bringing to some extent their books in order, certainly without giving up on their executives' bonuses, and seeking higher profits by investing in a narrow segment of the economy, as record profits just reported by Goldman Sachs show. Overall, the pool of capital to be lent has shrunk dramatically. And therefore, since I insist credit is the main source of consumption, we are starting for the majority of households in what I call, to some extent, a post-consumption society. Not in the sense that people cannot buy their groceries or drive their cars, although in some cases this is the case already, but in the sense that living to work, to borrow, to consume has become increasingly an obsolete way of life. Not because we are all happy hippies, but because we cannot do it. Indeed, recent data show something that the savings rate of Americans has been up sharply for the first time in 3 decades. The savings over disposable income in the United States has went down to 3% in the last decade, after being at about 5% in the 1960s, compared to 40% and plus in East Asia, by the way, is going up now to 6% and is projected to be 10% in the following years. Why? Because simply people are scared, they don't trust anything, and therefore they start saving, which therefore reduces demand further and reduces consumption further and deepens the crisis on that particular model of economic growth. This is particularly intense in relationship to spatial development. Financial smoke and mirror strategies had been used to prop up everything from consumer confidence to real estate prices to their extreme. Entire metropolitan areas, and particularly suburban areas, and particularly along the west and south of the United States, had been built as giant speculative schemes. These places never offer anything else other than the promise of profit. Profit for the developers and the banks, first and foremost. Profit for the contractors, the builders, the loan brokers, lenders, real estate agents, and ultimately home buyers and sellers. Other than the now busted promise of instant profit, these vast spans of new homes sprawling in a boundless territory had no reason to be built the way they were built and where they were built. They downgraded the quality of the existing cities, diluted infrastructural resources, and destroyed the environment. Despite the fact that, according to the US Census, there are, at this point in the United States, slightly more single households than nuclear family households, a trend which is, by the way, more pronounced in metropolitan areas, policymakers, politicians, and urban planners, and even geographers have never dared to question the fundamental validity of the single-family residence as the building block of the modern city. Truck developers still sell the 50s idea of the American dream, but most metropolitan Americans are too diverse to really buy into that homogeneous image. So why has the system been so utterly resistant to new planning practices that would reflect more adequately the diversity and demographics of the place? The answer is simple. It lies beyond the explanation of nostalgia in the realm of profit-making in the real estate market to feed profit-making in the financial market. And it's no more complication than that. To add true value to a place would necessitate knowledge of the place, the local culture, and the environment, which would take time. And time is money. A one-size-fits-all zoning regulation allows for a replicable formula of development everywhere, maximizing short-term profit. And so, as it has been revealed by the current housing and financial crisis, this profit scheme has largely lost its validity. Not profit, not capitalism, but this particular scheme of capitalism. The areas built according to the generic suburban formula are in fact the ones with the steepest drop in real estate value across the United States. The bad news, of course, is that the people who bought into it, often by lack of other choices, are spared from huge financial and personal tragedy. And the other bad news is that we are left with the environmental hazard that these huge areas of suburban tract housing represent. Many of these formula-driven developments currently are being abandoned and dilapidated only a few years after their completion due to a mass exodus of homeowners that followed the mortgage crisis and due to poor construction methods. Left to itself, the current model of housing and urban development will lead to the same negative results, destroying family budgets, people's lives, and our environment. And thus, the importance of imagining ways out of the crisis that induce a more sustainable urbanism, financially, spatially, environmentally, and socially. You know, corporate leaders these days like to refer to the Chinese ideogram in which the same symbol represents crisis and opportunity, that again and again in every corporate speech this happens. They forget to say crisis for us, opportunity for them. That's a different matter. But this is why it is crucial to truly use the crisis as an opportunity to create the spatial foundations for a better, different life. An opportunity to use the huge amount of knowledge that we have and creativity that we have to rethink urbanism as if people matter. So, before going into some remarks along these lines, let me put our context, our urban context, in a succinct historical perspective. Urban policies have always been central to the management of the transition from one socioeconomic model to another. The 1930s Great Depression in the United States, and I would say also in other countries, but let me focus not to complicate things further. You will complicate then later in the discussion talking about anything you want in the world. But in the 1930s, the United States could only emerge from the Great Depression by the gigantic mobilization of resources that was required by World War II. The military industrial machine was the most powerful economic stimulus in the history of this country. But its effects started to vanish after the war ended. And so something else had to replace this growth machine. It didn't come by the side. It was serendipity, but serendipity that was being tested and celebrated by policymakers. This something else was the federal urban policy of the 1950s. The new mortgage policies established in the 1930s were deployed from the late 1940s onwards and induced the dramatic expansion of the American suburbs, as all urbanists know. In turn, this expansion was made possible by the Highway Act of 1956 that provided federal subsidies up to 90% of the cost for the construction of metropolitan freeways, intermetropolitan, but of course they became metropolitan. And so both the suburbs and the freeway program supported the expansion of the automobile industry, the heart of the industrial era. And the combination of mortgages and easy credit for the purchase of automobiles and household appliances favored the rise of the self-sufficient suburban single-family dwelling, fully equipped for family life, and with a full-time worker, the suburban housewife, to manage the unit and provide transportation and services for the family at large. And Hollywood did the rest, idealizing the suburban way of life in terms of a fairy tale. This was, in fact, a most efficient machine, one of the best in history, of capital accumulation and social stability at the same time. A machine that created a large middle class in America and improved the quality of life of millions of families for as long as the dream could be sustained. But gradually, the model that even in its original version left out large segments of the American population, particularly ethnic minorities, gradually this model evolved toward its demise, starting, by the way, with the disappearance of the full-time suburban housewife that became a salaried worker and who gradually rebelled against its subordinate condition in an isolated household. So both the cultural transformation and the economic contradictions that emerged from that model started to undo the model itself. Indeed, the so-called Keynesian model of economic growth that was associated to this expansion, engineered by government spending, came to a halt in the economic crisis of the 1970s and was replaced by the recapitalization of capitalism launched in the 1980s by globalization, deregulation, and liberalization of production, trade, and finance in the US and in the world. In the US, the government aimed at liberalizing and stimulating the financial market by banking on home equity. In 1982, properties of the US households were worth 106% of the GDP, and their debts amounted to only half of it. Then lending was deregulated by the Monetary Control Act of 1980 and the Gump-Saint-Germain Act of 1982. It became then possible for households to borrow on the value of their homes, and they did it eagerly, counting on the supposedly endless rise of value of property and stocks, and therefore placing themselves in unsustainable levels of debt. 1960 savings rate for the US households over disposable income was, in 1960, a meager 8%. I say meager 8% in the world context. In East Asia it was over 40%, and in Western Europe about 25%. But this saving rate went down by 2007 to 2.7%. The American households financed their consumption with home equity. When the value of their homes plummeted, their only possession was a pile of debt. In 1998, their debt was 3% of disposable income. Only 3% in 1998, 2 years ago. In 2008, the debt over disposable income became 130%. So in 20 years, we went from 3% to 130% over disposable income. As a result, you can imagine, prime mortgage delinquencies soared, and in percentage of loans increased from 2.5% in 1998 to 118% in 2008. And so the form of capitalism and the urban expression of this form of liberalized global capitalism that shaped the world in the 1980s appears not to be viable any longer. Not capitalism, not the end of capitalism. Capitalism is eternal, okay? Let's start with that. But changes in capitalism are very important. When the one system is the same, the most important thing is the variations of the system in practical terms. That inability of this model to continue to reproduce itself is not new. It's like after the 1930s, a new model was introduced, then in the 1980s, a new model was introduced, and now, at this point, a new model can, should, ought to be introduced. But which one? This is not a matter of historical fate or structural determination of capitalism. This is a matter of political conflicts, values proposed and counteracted, and ultimately of policy choices. I would add that in this particular circumstance now, we have, in addition, an unsustainable environmental crisis, which is linked to the particular form of urban development that we have espoused for years. So the management of the crisis and the production of a new city, better adapted to respond to the challenges of our time, may go hand in hand in a process of multidimensional social and spatial change aimed at superseding the multidimensional crisis we are in. All these are observations, facts, sad observations, dramatic facts, I think much more than one can imagine. From now on, I'm going to try to introduce some remarks to justify the title of my talk, Reinventing Urbanism. In the current conditions of confusion and potential chaos, we are not out of the woods by any means. We are in a state of suspended animation by unsustainable government spending. Under such conditions, I still believe, in the power of ideas as levers of transformation. And after all, most of us, that's the only thing we have. So we better believe in it. So I wish to contribute to the current debate by proposing some of these ideas on a new form of urban space, associated necessarily to the broader framework of economic and social policies. Not a systematic vision, but a few examples that give a flavor of what could be a different form of urbanism. I must immediately say that this kind of elaboration is the result of work that I have been doing for the past year with a collaborator in Los Angeles, Laura Berhalter, architect and environmental designer, who would have been here, but she cannot because just had a baby. So, so to say this is to say these are our ideas and not just simply my ideas. And particularly, I will show some of the slides on the drawings, and that definitely hurt because I have changed since I left Berkeley, but I still don't draw. Okay, so any drawings are from Laura. But these, you will see, sound like utopias, but they are not. They are ideas in practice. We contend that they are technically and economically sustainable and feasible. The problem is, and that's a fundamental one, how the political and ideological context will make possible to dare to think and act otherwise. Let's start with a very little technical thing, which many of you know. I will go, if you wish, I will first try to talk quickly about land use zoning. Then I will have some remarks on housing. Then I will have some remarks on the problems, the issues of sharing space and sharing life. I will focus on urban farming, and I will deal more in length with the environmental sustainable urban mobility approach to finish with public space and the relationship between public space and the meaning of the city. First of all, to actually be able to act on space, we have to free space from bureaucracies. We have to free people from bureaucracy. And that concretely means to completely change zoning laws. Zoning, with its restrictions on land use, is a iron cage for any transformation of a space and for any kind of creative planning or creative living. It's not that we have to get rid of any controls on the uses of a space, but the idea is to change zoning laws and turn it into performance guidelines, which is a different thing. So the idea is that every area should have, large or small, should be built and developed under certain performance guidelines, which at least should include the following criteria: ecological performance, social quality to the local community, economic performance, and aesthetic and artistic value. But this is different of saying everything has to be following this master plan that decides that here is only housing of such size, here is only manufacturing, here is only services, which is belied by the entire history of urban transformation. By replacing zoning laws with performance guidelines, we would single-handedly address so many of our current urban problems. We could transform monotonous suburban landscape based on this zoning into vibrant communities by turning every community into mixed use, not from a top-down master plan approach of apartment living above a mall, but in a spontaneous, diverse, and grassroots initiative. The fact that one can now open a business anywhere as long as the performance criteria are respected means the beginning of a new chapter of community entrepreneurialism, creating local economies based on real added values. This gradual transformation would gradually tailor itself to each and every community and give places its unique identities, rather than the master plan or zone one-size-fits-all solutions that currently make up our urban fabric. In fact, it would no longer exempt factories and polluting industries to be exempt from performance standards. In other words, performance standards had to be met also by manufacturing, rather than forbidding to pollute in one neighborhood and letting to pollute in another neighborhood, which ultimately, in terms of the environmental sustainability, is the same. But with performance standards gradually implemented, of course, manufacturing jobs could be placed in what once was a purely residential neighborhood, as well as retail, offices, restaurants. So, and there would be no longer those neighborhoods stigma for the dirty industrial places, because they would be mixed into the urban fabric. More anti-bureaucratic measures. The minimum lot size should be eliminated, and I will come to this in a moment. The legal process to subdivide and join land should be freed from its current red tape procedures so that people can play around with the space, again, under the performance criteria of sustainability. On-site parking requirements should be eliminated and made voluntarily. Currently, of course you know, in US metropolitan areas, every single family home must provide a garage for at least 2 cars, which therefore, this transforms all the suburbs in these monotonous rows of garages, which in addition, they are not used for the cars. So rather than imposing the notion of everybody with a garage, the idea is to provide parking structures free for the homeowners, if you wish, in the vicinity of the neighborhood. Fifth, every neighborhood should designate at least one street as a pedestrian zone, as a way to actually stimulate local life. 6, processing of licenses to operate small restaurants, home-cooked food, and beverage service businesses should be made easier so that people could start having cooking services from the neighbors in the neighborhood, which all this, by the way, the immigrant communities do it by themselves, permit or not permit. And this creates a thriving community. The business themselves would have to comply with the performance standards, of course, but it would favor places serving healthy, locally grown food and economically disadvantaged businesses that use lots of takeout packaging, highly processed food. In other words, ecological performance and economic local viability goes hand in hand. And this would also help to create a whole new entrepreneurial class of small-scale food businesses, giving people of all backgrounds economic opportunities. And it would also create access for citizens to convenient, healthy, home-cooked food choices within walking distance from their houses and work. And it would create a real competition with fast food chains, which under the performance regulation could not perform. So, since zoning laws had been replaced with performance standards, then small businesses, small home-cooked food businesses, small cafes could start being located anywhere, thus creating lively neighborhoods and social places for exchange and to meet neighbors. And therefore could be outdoor areas in good weather, of course, and protected indoor areas, but also in the neighborhood in other places. First slide, please. So this is a representation of something that does exist in the Los Angeles area. This is not a cafe, normal cafe. This is a neighborhood initiative of people having a cooperative to produce food and to have cafe, etc., in the center of the neighborhood, having obtained some temporary permit from the city to actually be together without having to drive to a mall to have a cafe. Take it out, please. Thank you. So, second layer of remarks on housing. The basic contradiction in our cities is what is the foundation of people's lives, that is their home, is also the source of business profit for the real estate industry and the primary form of accumulating assets for people themselves. Both. So the assumption is that it's okay because the market satisfies the housing needs for the large majority of the population, so in fact, everything goes well. I have a home, the real estate industry and construction industry makes a profit, and then and I also accumulate, and then that's the basis of my home equity on which I can borrow, etc. Well, this is the model that has collapsed. Because in fact, it's not true that the market satisfies the housing need for the majority of the population. The housing market has always, everywhere, been heavily subsidized. And of course in the United States as well. It is subsidized by the federally backed housing mortgage system, which therefore is also a transfer of wealth from the income taxes of everybody to, for a long time, to the housing for the homeowners. So the homeowners had been subsidized by the rest of the population. But moreover, the important thing is that the housing by itself could not provide, the market by itself could not provide housing. It's the government that in direct or indirect ways has provided the housing. Now, the fact that this government subsidy it's became within the previous system increasingly unable to provide housing has led to the current affordability crisis of housing. When the process reverses, when the process of government subsidizing and then the real estate and the mortgage industry provide housing, and then people on the base of their housing borrow and everybody is happy, when this system is halted, the process reverses, and then is the current case of massive foreclosures, housing prices plummet, and people's assets dwindle while unemployment grows and wages decline. And so there is little hope that without major changes in housing policy and urban forms, the system, as we have known in the last 20, 25 years, could be restored. Now, the government is bailing out banks in the hope that they will restart lending and the mortgage market may function again. This may happen for a segment of the population, but millions are not in this category, either because they have lost their job or they now require 20% down payment. In other words, the new lending conditions do not fit to a very large segment of the population, which at the same time, they continue without being able to pay their mortgages. In fact, I would say dramatic but interesting data is that most houses repossessed by the banks because of their owners could not pay the mortgages are not finding a new owner in spite of drastic price cuts. Even at the discount level, people are not able to re-enter the housing market. And under such conditions, a number of measures could be combined. In some cases, the federal government could, and is in fact doing it, extending the warranty of second mortgages by federal institutions to good faith prospective buyers at the limit of their possibilities, extending the subsidy so that to reach out the large segment of the population that cannot fulfill the criteria. But something else is happening. Community banks, as you know, are being funded now by the federal government to lend to local businesses. The new fee that Obama is trying to impose on the banking industry, a large part of this is to fund federally backed community banks. This is mainly targeted to small businesses, local small businesses, but this could be easily extended to local homeowners through housing cooperatives formed by the homeowners on the edge of foreclosure, buying their homes from the banks at a discount price with the support of loans from the community banks backed by the federal government. Going further, schemes of house sharing, either rental or in co-ownership, could be developed with the help of both federal agencies and local governments, as well as non-profit foundations. However, a number of imaginative financial schemes can be implemented, but their feasibility is dramatically hampered by the current legal framework of housing development and by the rigidity of local policies that fix the spatial forms in their current state. And so the idea would be to propose a reassessment of the dwelling forms that are appropriate for a period of reduced lending and a slow urban growth. Some of these new forms of habitat should be based on the notion of community network of social ties and resource sharing. For instance, the size of the houses. Everybody has been criticizing the excessive size of many suburban housing, family housing that now are half empty. And in fact, Los Angeles has introduced a law, an ordinance called the anti-mansionization law to reduce the size. Well, depends. Yes, the size, a large house is terrible for one person, inherited from the history of urbanization in this country that doesn't fit. But it's great for communal living. It's great for sharing space, residential space. Not kind of countercultural communes. No, practically, for people living together and sharing a space, and sharing more than a space. Sharing cooking food, taking care of the kids, sharing resources, sharing transportation, sharing many things. Mini housing cooperatives, of course, based on personal arrangement, but fundamentally also with a contract. In fact, most students do this these days. And nothing happens. There are little conflicts, as there are in the traditional nuclear, very married families, right? You took my car today, so yes, daily living is a daily conflict and at the same time a daily cooperation. So freeing the notion of this patriarchal nuclear suburban family in a large house, that is a myth, does not exist anymore, and make it possible some of this housing to be adopted as communal sharing resources for urban living could be another major initiative to be taken. But it's impossible now. It's impossible legally. It's impossible legally. So that's why I'm saying the problem is not only capital, the problem is bureaucracy. Bureaucracy. The problem is the zoning laws, but they are connected because these zoning laws and this minimum lot size and this type of housing is perfect for the real estate industry and for the construction industry that just is an assembly line of churning off products that then people have to fit into them. So it's the other way around. So it's not top-down planning. It's opening up the possibilities for people to experiment, both in terms of the living forms and in terms of their creation of inventive financial schemes with the support of community banks supported by the federal government on the basis of a number of restrictions. And so space sharing is also sharing other resources, services, food, clothes, transportation, energy, as well as emotional matters, sharing emotions, which is also a fundamental dimension of urban life. So I think the idea of possible forms of urban resource sharing as the basis for new forms of urban living could be a new type of urban planning. And of course, the web-based social spaces are good tools for spreading information, debating issues, and therefore a connection between sharing a space and sharing social space in the web. And not only information, but experiences, support, et cetera. This connection, it actually would fit better in our society than fragmenting in suburban tracts the social life. Among other things, fragmented space strengthens, reinforces the tendencies to a fragmented social structure, which is one of the critical issues that we are living today. In other words, the large nuclear family of the 1950s and 60s gave rise to dwelling units with an oversupply of space. The sharing of this space in the conditions of today may provide a partial answer to the housing crisis on the condition that it goes hand in hand with a cultural transformation, learning to live together. More forms of what I call urban self-reliance. Shopping malls are in a tremendous crisis. Just go into the business press. Shopping malls are collapsing throughout America. But they are huge structures. Half of them are empty. People are not using it. Business Week had an article, all this devalued commercial space, what we are going to do with that? Well, let's convert them. You know, it's possible to convert shopping malls into a variety of uses for such a space. Part could be housing, part could be transformed into a smaller size commercial space. Instead of gigantic parking that people cannot use because they don't go there, a number of community services, parks, and of course also growing food, urban farming. Urban farming is one of the forms that all over the world is exploding. Well, in the developing world has always been the way, right? I mean, people always were growing their food near their house or their shack to supplement their income. But now urban farming, growing food not to be a she ecologist, but to eat it, to actually eat it, and know what you are eating, and also be able to live healthier life, have healthier food, and knowing for sure that it's organic, unless you put something. So urban farming is exploding all over the world. But urban farming needs a space. And part of the space depends on rezoning, on changing the zoning ordinances, and depends on finding actually the space all over the metropolitan area. And in that sense, many of the disaffected, semi-disaffected shopping malls are part of it. Sounds very utopian. I will end later on with the practicality of this matter, because there are much worse things coming. In fact, people, without asking any permission, are already using their own front and backyards to grow vegetables rather than tending their immaculate lawn. No immaculate lawns anymore, orchards. And people are doing it with no permit. There is a broader notion of reusing, creative reuse of a space. Corporate buildings at this point, of the real estate corporations and of the financial corporations, corporate buildings have huge vacancy rates. For instance, in Los Angeles, a significant part of Bunker Hill buildings are not used. But what to do with that? Well, a year ago, we were, I think, with Jennifer and Michael and other people in Red Cat in Los Angeles in a debate on the urban future of downtown. Ed Soja was there, and we proposed with Ed the notion of that was the peak of the crisis in January. The notion of for the federal government to, as a condition to bail out all these corporate finance and real estate companies, to obtain the use or the management of these half-empty buildings and to convert them into small businesses, service-producing small businesses, and also, in some extent, subsidized housing, rather than build extremely expensive housing in downtown Los Angeles, which they want to do, and they want to do low-income housing, but at a terrible cost. The buildings are there; they are not being used. Actually, one of the top persons in the city of Los Angeles was there, a great woman, and she said, that's a good idea. We wouldn't be against. Of course, she was sacked last week by the mayor, but you know that causality is, correlation is not causality, so I don't say that's what happened. But it's not like people found it relatively coherent and a good idea. Space is not used, government is actually owning or subsidizing massively these corporations, so they should give something in exchange. So the broader notion is the reuse, the creative reuse of existing built space. But we know that both the environmental crisis and much of the urban living in America and in the world is dominated by the crisis of our model of urban mobility, largely based in the American cities, in the massive use of the automobile. The automobile is the epitome of all the problems we are having in the metropolitan crisis. And what dominates the city is the use of the automobile as the fundamental means of transportation. I know that the automobile also can be very useful for people's lives. You can always rely on your Toyotas, so it's really not a problem. But this is the critical matter. So urban mobility is crucial, because without that, cities don't function, people don't work, etc. So we have to really address with much more creative formulas the management of urban mobility. Planners had been trying to do that for years, of course. And the fundamental notion there has been the connection between land use and transportation, and trying to organize the flows rather than finding means of transportation to solve the flows. But this is not enough, because there's some basic things in terms of the automobile model, automobile center model, are blocking the possibilities. So, by the way, I recommend you a book by a British urban sociologist, John Arry, just published, After the Car, which is very interesting, showing concretely all the possibilities after the car. Well, the cars are going to be there, different cars, but are going to be there, but not the only thing, not the only or the main alternative. So the fundamental thing here is to have a multimodal system and a multi-approach to transportation and mobility. On the one hand, focusing on making sure through metropolitan planning, not local planning, that there is a multi-nuclearity of the metropolitan area and that there are multi-use of every metropolitan nucleus, so that the flows of transportation between different parts of the metropolitan area are reduced drastically. So more self-sufficiency. This is a very old notion from the British New Towns program. To have relatively multifunctional, multi-uses communities everywhere that therefore would reduce the overall metropolitan transportation. We know why the system failed in that sense and became mainly commuter residential areas, but that was linked to the overall industrial policy and to the inability of a government to follow up the original orientations of the Abercrombie plan, which was really laying out a different metropolitan model that became increasingly close to the American suburbs rather than, not entirely, but closer than to the original idea of the new towns. The fundamental thing is many different notions at the same time. Of course, ideologically and emotionally, the big thing these days is how much we can introduce pedestrian walks and actually walking as a transportation mean, and bicycles. The whole world is discussing about bicycles. The European models like bicycling, that you can take a bike from anywhere in the city and then you use it. You have a subscription, which in Barcelona costs about 30 euros a year, and you can take the bike and then you leave it in another part of the city, and you have enough distributed places for the bikes in the city. So it's the whole idea of the Amsterdam provost, but of course paying a little bit, because after all, and with an electronic card not to steal the bicycle. But that's what happened with the white bicycles of the provost. They were stolen by the provost. So this is working. It's working in Paris, it's working in Lyon, it's working in a number of European cities. It's working. But the problem is that when you have the bicycle, where you go, how you use the bicycle in the city. Well, great idea, bicycle lanes. Bicycle lanes, it requires a determined, courageous attempt to risk your life on behalf of the cause. Particularly in Paris, where they share the lanes with the buses. And Parisian buses are very big. My colleague, Laura Berhalter, came up with a solution. Let's have bicycle freeways at two levels. First, of course, using everything you can use, and we are not going to start building freeways in the city again. So first, using ways of transportation, riparian ways, along the rivers. At least in Los Angeles River is easy because there's no river, right? So a little bit. I mean, Jennifer Walls took care that there still is a trickle of water. But there are natural ways of passage in the cities that can be used to build a very fast, dedicated bicycle lanes. The issue is that the bicycle is only an efficient transportation system if you can go fast and you don't have to jump over multiple obstacles. You can go fast. You can reach about 15, for a non-trained bicyclist, 15 to 20 miles per hour speed, which is far more than urban traffic, including in the freeway system, commuting hours. For trained bicyclists, it's about 30 miles per hour. But let's forget about the supermen and superwomen. For normal people, can be, then many European cities at this point have between 30% and 50% commuting traffic on bicycle. Amsterdam, by the way, is about 35%. Yeah, Amsterdam is Amsterdam, okay, but Zurich is not countercultural people. Can you imagine countercultural people in Zurich? So, no, but on bicycle, they do it as well. So, first, it's possible to use many areas of the city in which you can have linear passage lanes which are not impeded by traffic, by other possibilities. And then, in many of thinking now on American cities, the notion is to really be competitive and alternative to the predominant mode of transportation, the automobile, without the automobile being eliminated. That, no way. She designed a system of freeways on top of the current freeways. So bicycle freeways on top of the current automobile-dedicated freeways. Please, slide. So this is the lower part, of course. I objected that this would block the sun from my driving, so she opened completely the whole thing, so it's actually better than the Bay Bridge. So cars are in the lower part. However, can you see a little thing on the upper right side? Well, this little line there is a suspended light rail train. So rather than having a subway built through the city, excavating the entire city, there is a system, which is technologically already possible and has been experimented in Japan, of light cars suspended from there, which is in fact a suspended metro. Remember, everybody thought in Chicago in the 1920s that the elevated train was crazy, but provided very efficient transportation, Chicago, over the elevated thing, plus made the possibility of all kind of action movies in the elevated train. So keep going with the slide. Okay, this is the upper part of the freeway, which you can see bicycles are there, skaters are of course allowed, and a central area of nice grass where joggers can go. So and of course trees, etc. But the main thing is that you have a lane that is unimpeded and people can go on for miles and miles and miles. Next one. So here is the bicycle freeway arriving and entering downtown Los Angeles. Again, the idea is that you combine with a linear urban park. Come on, even Le Corbusier did it. So a linear urban park which can actually be integrating the environment with transportation. And remember, under is the automobile freeway for the zombies who still drive. You know, they are relegated to the down of the food chain, while elevating people to the top of the food chain. And next slide. So, and then of course the notion is that this should be also a social space. You can have sidewalk cafes and places. So creating a linear long public space in which people can use it. Of course, this is Los Angeles weather, but don't worry, could be heated and cover bicycle freeways all over the frozen universe of the Midwest. Go ahead. And this, of course, is here you can see better on the right side, suspended the rail train that goes into the freeway coming into urban Los Angeles. So, drop the That's it for the slides. It's not, we have many more, but that's enough because I want to finish my talk in a few minutes. So in addition, by the way, the idea is that would be an elevator through to go up and down, and with different stations of the train. The same elevator that goes to the train station also is the way to access the bicycle freeway with a bicycle. But to actually make it a commuting system, not on Sunday morning, a commuting system, then you need locker rooms in which you have your bicycle there. You go, take your bicycle, and actually you have another locker room near your place with your business suit. So you bike, you go there, you have a shower, and then you put your business suit and go to do the same stupid thing every day. But at least you do it on a style, which is a different thing. Studies show, comparing the emotional satisfaction from different transportation means, the worst is mass transit. The best, by far, is bicycle. As a transportation mean, again, not the Sunday experience. Well, this, of course, had to be combined with many other things, particularly with a transformation of the vehicles, including the automobile. And in that sense, the most innovative design that I know is the one by Bill Mitchell at MIT, the city car, which is already operational, and as well as the city motorcycle, which is actually, this one is being produced already on an industrial scale by, naturally, a Taiwanese company. The city car design, in fact, was commissioned by General Motors before it became a public corporation. So as you know, you can see it in the web easily, but simply I remind you that this is an electric car, but it's also more than that. It's a foldable car. You can fold it. And then you can fold it and stack it with a pile of other cars in poles that are supported originally by solar power or other forms, wind power, etc. So there is a basis of electricity there, but then there is a pile of cars that are stuck, and then they recharge, of course, when they run, and they recharge themselves and the other cars when they are stuck in the pole. Okay? And the car being foldable can be taken from anywhere in the city, the same system that is being used with bicycles in Europe, and it's also programmable. So it's your individual car, but your individuality is not in the car, it's in your electronic card. So any car recognizes you, changes color, adapts the system, opens up and says, hello, Bill. So this exists, okay? So it's, the utopian thing is that this is stupid society, not the technology, not the imagination. This we already have. So gosh, I'm still a little bit Marxist. This notion of the forces of production being blocked by the social relationship of production, well, that's the point. You know, there is still social relationship of production, and they have corporate suits, and they have corporate names. Now, and by the way, this freeway program that we were proposing, we were thinking directly about Obama's promises. Obama is trying, at least says, to revamp the decaying transportation system, the decaying road, the decaying everything is decaying in terms of the public infrastructure. Well, if you are going to destroy a freeway, to repair it, well, you should try to do something different, not to do exactly the same thing. So you are going to undo freeways. Well, do new freeways with a bicycle freeway on top. And that we calculated the cost in terms of relationship to building a subway, for instance. And of course, it's 1/10 of what would be building a subway. And then a number of urban paths to actually walk and walk from places to places. Not, you know, one of the paradoxes of our life is people who take their car, drive like crazy, go to a park, run around, take the car back to exercise. rather than being able to exercise going to places. However, to go to places, you need to be unimpeded in terms of your walk, and you need to have a really pleasant environment, so a green environment, trees, paths, lanes, all these could be combined. All these could be combined. And there are a number of things that the moment you start thinking about it, you can actually do it. There are debates about the measure, but when the current mayor of Chicago, Daley Jr., decided to plant gardens in the roofs of the buildings of Chicago by the thousands, everybody thought, what? That's crazy. Well, now Chicago is a green city on the top. So again, the whole idea is to start to liberate our imagination and then dare to think and act. Just one remark on the importance of public space. Public space is the heart of the city. The city always had been communication systems, and the communication systems are organized around public spaces. The way we had been dealing with public spaces for a long, long time is the contrary of what the public space notion is. Public space is not a secluded public spaces, which monumental symbols that you have to go there from anywhere in the metropolitan area. So public space is a distributed public space. Public space can be a street corner with 3 trees and a little park and a cafe or whatever, or a yoga center. Places of activity and where people can be there in the public and interact with each other. This is public space. And this is the public space of the famous Italian piazzas. It's not Piazza Navona, it's the little piazzas everywhere in Rome. That's where the public space is. So distributed public space requires, again, a deliberate policy of helping to have multi-use corner streets, small parks distributed all over the place. One of the good things about the Barcelona model, many are not so good, but one good thing is the distribution of public spaces through squares that were built, big squares where people could really meet, and small, very small, micro spaces where people could interact, sometimes a few square meters in a corner of a medieval street. The idea of public space is not to create theme parks. The Barcelona Ramblas are a theme park at this point. It's not a public space. Most of San Francisco is a theme park for tourists. It's not a public space. Public space is where people can appropriate themselves and feel themselves at home while being in the street. And you know what? Public space, vibrant, distributed public space, is one of the key elements for a safe city. A safe city is not based on police. If you need police, bad. It's not a safe city. Of course, there's always some need of police. But really, the main issues with the police is that they hate to see more than 4 people together in the street, scheming something. So they empty the streets as soon as they see a little crowd, out. Because for them, their job is much simpler if they take people one by one. It's much more controllable. But it kills the city, it empties the city, and therefore all the bad guys can proliferate. And that's a very important change of mind. Public space is related to the ability of people to retake their streets, and the ability of the people to retake their streets is connected to some of the design. So to go from the city of fear to the city of hope was through neighborhood life, distributed public space, and the ability to live, the capacity of citizens to meet each other without fearing that they are actually violating the curfew. And I say this because poor David Harvey, first time he arrived in Baltimore many years ago, at 9 p.m., he had the bad idea to walk around his neighborhood in Baltimore, and he was arrested by the police. I said, why? So, well, you were walking in the street. But, yeah, well, suspicious. 9 p.m., you the only person walking the street? So, after that, David Harvey started to radicalize his speech. So how all this could be done? Well, you know what? It is being done. It is being done. This is under the radar, but not so much, because Michelle Obama is doing urban farming in the White House lawn and teaching her children to grow vegetables there. Who would think, just imagine, who would think that the White House lawn could be used for urban farming, okay? And of course, hundreds and hundreds of schools around the United States have, from that moment, felt legitimized to do the same thing. They were already doing it, but the scale of the phenomenon has grown extraordinarily. There are, throughout the world, tens, hundreds of thousands of people living differently already. There has been a total transformation of doing alternative politics in the world, from trying to mobilize to seize power to try to live differently already now. Because the moment you seize power, to seize power, you have to become a bureaucrat. And if you really reach power, you then are the ultimate bureaucrat. So people are not delegating anymore. They are doing it themselves. You want just a quick thing? Check on the website of the Young Foundation in Britain. The Young Foundation is coordinating a number of these things, led by Jeff Mulgan, and has a website where many of the experiences in Britain and in Europe are being proposed. I'm doing such a research these days, and I'm finding huge amounts of time banks, people sharing time over the net, consumer cooperatives, most of them related to eco-farming, producing cooperatives relating to the consuming cooperatives, house sharing, home task sharing, barter. Again, all these on a massive scale, not a few hundred communes, hundreds of people, and normal people, okay? So people who think it's a different life that we could actually take in our hands. The problem is that, by the way, there is an incredible TV program just finished in the production stage by the Dutch television, VPRO, exactly showing these practices all over the world. They went for 6 months interviewing and showing people, and they are going to air, it's a series, starting next month. So watch out, this is there. And the problem is that we still live in our little boxes, and the inability to link to each other shows that we don't know what other people are doing. The web is full of experiences. People around the world know that there's a change. Not because suddenly we have a counterculture spreading, because in the cracks of the system that cannot perform, alternative forms of solving problems may develop. So it's a connection between a vanguard of usually young people refusing to live the same kind of stupid lives than their parents, as we did in our time, with the needs to live differently because we cannot afford to live as we were living. So it's a connection, again, between an intellectual, cultural, advanced group of people with many people who do urban farming to eat, and many people who share time in time banks because that's the only way they can take care of the children, and so on, and so on. So all this ultimately may or may not change, not solely depending on our ideas. I think ideas are fundamental. I think we can, but depends on how citizens are able to ultimately mobilize to change the local and global policies that are shaping their lives. So there is a way of reinventing urbanism. The ideas are there. The political will of literally millions of people are there. But it's also important to establish this connection between ideas and practice. And in that sense, this college, it has been, and I hope will be, very important. The college can contribute to reinvent urbanism. This is the college of Catherine Bauer. This is the college of Jack Kent. This is the college of Roger Montgomery. This is the college that has been at the forefront of rethinking the ways we live in cities and beyond for generations. And there is a new generation. my colleague and former student Manuel Hudson is one of the young faculty who is taking the charge, and I hope you do, of changing the college toward the new challenges that we have down the line. I think you can do it. In connecting my two life experiences, in the age of the most blighted area of downtown Los Angeles, one of the worst places, there is a warehouse in which a number of people very courageously are trying to develop urban experimentation. It's called the Farm Lab. And it has a banner on its top. The banner says, "Another city is possible." I do think it is possible. And I also think that you, the Berkeley College of Environmental Design, can help to make it possible. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful.
A little bit too long, but.
Well, we lost 15 minutes compared to 1979. What's that? Okay. We're going to move the mic to the center aisle, and we're also going to allow Manuel to answer a few questions before we take a break, but we are behind schedule, so we'll just have a time for a few questions.
Thank you very much for those insights in terms of what can be done. And as you mentioned, it is happening already at a very small scale. And as you indicated, it is happening in spite of our bureaucracies, to which I am part of at this point. And it is happening in spite of some of our planning practices. So when you were closing your talk, you were talking about the possibility of rethinking. Can you elaborate on that? If we are to rethink some of our bureaucracies or dismantle part of our bureaucracies, what will be some of the thoughts, what will be some of the training that we will want to introduce in our schools in order to be able to enact some of the pieces that you have mentioned, connecting people with forms, creating public spaces, dismantling zoning, some of those tasks that could be quite challenging in our current society?
Thank you. Well, first, glad to see you. No, I have not. Well, look, I think that it's not so different from what this college has been doing for years, in fact. It's allowing in the classes and in the programs for free experimentation of ideas and perhaps connecting it more directly to work on the ground. So here is the issue. The educational institutions have a fundamental task to provide people with the opportunity to have jobs and good jobs. That's the fundamental task. If we fail in that, everything else is ideology. And therefore, here's the contradiction. The jobs, the image, what the jobs that are needed in the planning profession, for instance, or in the architectural profession, this image may not correspond entirely to reality. So it's a possibility that, in fact, being more innovative, being able to imagine other solutions that simply do, let's say, zoning ordinances, is actually a better tool in the job market. So it's not even that we have to resist adapting people to the job market. It's that we have a perception of the job market that often is obsolete. The job market these days in planning and architecture is much more emphasizing innovation than reproduction of what they do. Because what they do, they already know how to do it. What they don't know how to do is the new things. So my point simply would be emphasizing experimentation and emphasizing the connection to the real world, but not just to the real world of design firms and local planning bureaucracies. The real world out there in the neighborhoods, in the housing cooperatives, in the urban farming networks, that real world is a source of ideas and experimentation for the new city. So connecting more to society while strengthening the capacity to think and imagine.
Okay. I'm going to preface the comment by saying, well, I put on my rain gear to come here by bicycle. And this is typical that I'm in an urban center, so I can bike to places where most of the rest of the people there have come from a far distance by automobile. And so there's another solution. Volkswagen put on a conference here last spring about robotic automobiles. And there's a general understanding that 21st century technology will give us the capability of having carbon neutral, electrified, very fast, lightweight vehicles that allow us many times the speed door to door when going between distant urban centers. And so I think that one needs to look at this and say, well, bicycles are nice when you are actually in one of these urban centers and don't need the high speed of between the urban centers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, actually, that's what I tried to mention, that I insisted on the bicycle freeway thing because it's kind of the more groundbreaking idea. But I mentioned also that Bill Mitchell's city car prototype is exactly what you said. It's electric, it's everything, but it's more than that. It can actually be a totally revolutionary instrument of using transportation. And it goes quite fast, actually. Certainly, it's no problem to use it in the metropolitan area. So in that sense, there is a combination of land use zoning alternatives using bicycle, roller skates, and pedestrian walk, but at the same time as well, a total revolution in the car industry. And they can do it. They actually can do it. Why they wouldn't do it? Because they want to resist until the last minute to sell all this stuff that they already have. They have to amortize that, but they can do it. And one of my problems, actually, with some of the policies now in the government is that they could have put much more pressure on GM to change the production line. Damn it, we own it. I mean, you and I, 60% of GM is federal government, and 20% is pension funds from the unions. We own it, the largest American automobile company. So yes, it's modifying the fuel emissions, but come on, they could start mass producing electric cars and so on and so on. So you're absolutely right, I agree with you. Mike.
Please make the questions.
Okay, thank you, Manuel. That was very inspiring, like it always is. And as you know, I'm from the flat city of Amsterdam, where those bikes are, and I've been living in Berkeley to think of something different. And I'm taking the liberty here to launch a new word. So it's not so much a question, but I'd love your response on it. It's something I've been working on now for a year. It's coming out in 3 months. It's a sustainist manifesto. It's a cultural manifesto on the new era we're already in. And it never had a word, but I believe you believe in the power of ideas. We need also words to mobilize these things that are already being mobilized. We have to give them a name. The new word is terribly obvious. It's called sustainism.
Is what?
Sustainism. After modernism, we don't get postmodernism, we get sustainism. That's where we are now. And it's a combination of sustainability, network, digital, local, all the things you talked about. And we need these big concepts. Well, of course, we need, it comes for the first time, unlike modernism, out of the grassroots movement. It's like the 2 million non-profits that Paul Hawken talks about. That's Absolutely. Tens of millions of people all over the world.
Absolutely.
But we need a new word. And after modernism, come Sustainism. And I thought, this is the first time I say this publicly anywhere. I thought it was appropriate at this college, and here my old friend Manuel here, being in Berkeley and from Amsterdam, I thought I have to say it now. Thank you.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. I concur with your idea. I would add simply that sustainability, we have to make sure we understand by that, the planet is sustainable. We are not. That's a different thing. The planet would be very happy without us, no problem. It's our livability in the planet that is not sustainable if we continue to do what we do.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the future of urbanism beyond the American city and suburb. I realize that's sort of a big topic, but there's increasing wealth and disparity in international cities, particularly in the global south, and increasing fortress spaces and slum spaces. And I was wondering if you could sort of extend your talk a little bit to what urbanism might look like there and what the possibilities are in other cities.
That's easy. I will take another hour and I will. No, well, just one thing. I decided to be a little bit parochial, meaning this small country, the United States, but I didn't talk about the most important thing that people talk in the world now, China. Wow, China. So anyway, but you're absolutely right. The urban reality in our world is fundamentally a non-American and non-European reality. Remember that at this point, we are 52% urban population in the world. We are in the largest wave of urbanization. In about 15 years from now, we'll be 2/3, and by 2050, it will be 3/4 of the planet's population. And of this, all the growth is, of course, in the so-called developing countries, which now have developed so much in many cases that they're leading the way. Just one remark on that. We were not sustainable in our mode of urban development. We were not. But the only reason we could think that this was a couple of 200 years later, so who cares, is that the other guys were not doing it. We needed poverty, not to exploit the workers, which we don't need poor to exploit. We need rich to exploit. Not to exploit. We needed the poor to remain poor, and not to adopt our same model of massive consumption. Now, once China, Mexico, Brazil, India all go this way, now is panic, total panic, because they are imitating, and they shouldn't do that. They were supposed to stay poor, and we would help them. And now, really, this is the problem. And the first time I was in Guangzhou in 1983, I met the chief city planner of Guangzhou. And I told him, oh, this wonderful city, full of bicycles, 6.5 million people on bicycles. And then he said, you know what? You are a racist. Really? Yeah, you are a racist because you think that because we are Chinese, we love to bicycle up and down in the rain, in the heat, etc., etc. So you know what we are going to do? We are going to melt all our bicycles and build cars like you. So that's what is unsustainable. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask, you start saying that this was an international crisis, a worldwide crisis. And basically, I think that the crisis of urbanism that you present is just an American crisis of urbanism, because what you're proposing, in a way, is a kind of third-order ordination, how do you say that? Transforming Los Angeles in a third-world country, because many of the solutions that you are bringing are actually current in the rest of the world. So is the same crisis of urbanism is basically related to the previous questions. Can we talk about the same crisis of urbanism in the United States or everywhere else in the world, or not? So is still a crisis of urbanism in those parts of the world or not?
That's a very good point. I decided to concentrate for a number of pedagogical reasons, not to go overextended in a complicated talk, but you're absolutely right. However, I contend that this is the same crisis of urbanism almost everywhere in the developing world, in the world that has been produced in terms of the built environment in the last 40, 50 years. It's not necessarily the same in Europe, but it's for a number of reasons, although if we talk about the new suburbs in Germany or England or France, they fit the pattern. The automobile is dominant everywhere, even in mass transit areas. Barcelona metropolitan area, the ultimate city, is still 60% of commuting is by car. If we go into the exploding metropolises around the world, Bangkok, there's one major freeway from one top to another of the city, and this is a totally dominated freeway city with then rickshaws and all kind of other things and motorcycles, but the fundamental model, the American model, has been exported. Caracas is completely dominated by the same model. Sao Paulo, the same model. So if we go city by major metropolitan area, there is the crisis of a particular form of metropolitan form rather than city life. And then there, the solutions have to be adapted completely. So the problems are the same, the solutions are not necessarily the same, but the principle for the solution, which is eco-sustainability and relying on decentralized forms of urban life, this is certainly the same. And the main thing is China is doing the same thing that America did on a gigantic scale. They didn't have to do it. They didn't have to do it. It's something related to industrial cultural complex in China that decided that that's the way to be modern. But they didn't have to do it, and they are doing it, and they are already meeting exactly the same problems that the United States met 10 years ago.
Manuel, thank you so much.